At the end of the day, an LMS on its own will not embed learning. You're not going to change culture just through an LMS. You've got to build that coalition of people that surround the chapter, the business unit, whatever you do.
Hi, welcome to L&D Talks with Valamis, where we explore real-world strategies for driving learning, engagement, and impact. I'm Melissa Carroll with Valamis, and today we have a great conversation lined up. We'll be diving into how Lambda Chi Alpha built a successful learning program from the ground up, engaged learners across a vast network, and scaled their efforts nationally, all with the help of Valamis. Joining me today are Simon Taylor, Chief Learning Officer at Lambda Chi Alpha, who will share his firsthand experience leading the learning transformation, and Myles Runham, Senior Analyst at Fosway Group, who will bring in his industry insights on learning innovation. So let's get started with an insightful discussion packed with practical takeaways on making learning truly engaging and impactful. Okay, Simon, let's start at the beginning. So Lambda Chi Alpha recognized a need for a structured learning program. So can you walk us through what that process looked like? How did you determine the key requirements for your learning system?
Lambda Chi Alpha is an American fraternity, and that is really an organization that is effectively lots of little small business units. And these business units are called chapters. They average from about 40 young men right up to indeed 200. So these can be significant organizations with significant budgets going from 40 grand right up to 2 million. So if you think about that population of people and you bring them together at college with lots of different things that they need to achieve, and they have to look after each other, build teams, an organizational culture, and look after a budget, that's a big ask. So we really identified that we had a significant learning need to help their student C-suite be fit for role, but also prepare them for the future. And there's a real gap here in colleges in the US where we have young men walking out with a degree, but they are not ready for the workplace. So we really felt that we had to partner with an organization that would help us train our members, but also help them bridge the gap between college and career. So that's really how we started off the conversation. And the fact that you have experience of working with young people, I believe one of your first clients was a gaming organization, and you understood the needs of a younger audience, we were immediately attracted to Valamis.
That's great. And what role did Valamis play in supporting your journey?
What I loved about Valamis is you brought in that SME, that experience from your other clients to help us realize that too often when you get an LMS, you believe it's like a one-shot deal. And helping us realize that you have to have something that's future-proof, have to have something that the LMS is an add-on to. So what is your culture of learning actually going to look like? You know, what is your support system there, and how are you going to run this? Because what I loved about Valamis was it wasn't not just about getting us an LMS and getting us across the line. We got real advice about how to build that culture where that's worked elsewhere. And that's crucial when you think about our span across North America.
I was working with Simon on the criteria that Simon was going to market with and some of the selection process. One of the things that I think Valamis did that was very, very helpful to Simon and the team was they worked quite hard with the consulting relationship, even way before they'd even sent a proposal in. So they asked for workshop time to help understand the business, understand the learners, understand Simon's stakeholders. I think that added to the confidence that Simon was talking about. When Valamis came back with the proposal, they understood more clearly what's a good solution to this problem because they'd spent time on identifying and defining the problem as well.
You even bring back a memory because it's sort of come to the end of that sales sort of process. And I remember, I think it was your chief operating officer, he actually said, no, let's pause this and we want to do another deep dive to identify your need. And I love that, because that really forced us to think, what do we want to achieve with this system? At that point, I was like, this is a no-brainer. We got to go with these people.
So it sounds like you were finding a real partnership when you were evaluating Valamis. So why was it important for Lambda Chi to have that partnership experience when you were looking for a platform rather than just getting a platform and having that bit of technology?
It's important for me to have the right partner because I want to have a relationship that for as long as possible I can future-proof. Equally, our learning population, they're in their early 20s, so they have very distinct needs and expectations regarding a learning platform. And finally, and this is quite key, they do not join Lambda Chi to learn about finance, recruiting and sales. They join for an experience to be around other men in college throughout their university years. So we needed to have a platform that really engaged the learner, made them sit up and go, this is adding value. There's something here. We are immediately earning their trust. And I felt Valamis, in terms of your offering and in terms of your development pipeline, offered those features.
One of the things that was really important for you is that this was your first implementation of a learning system as well. There wasn't a learning system in the organization before. There wasn't necessarily the kind of expectations you might see from people who are transitioning from one system to another. There wasn't the infrastructure. There weren't the roles and the organization around it as well. And I think it was really important. The partnership was to help manage and create that as much as it is to implement the system and build the programs that Simon was talking about as well. And I think that's a part that I think is really easy for people to overlook. Where you go through an RFP process, you get the proposal back, but it's that reality of the relationship building and the understanding of what's easy and what isn't easy in the organization. I think that was really important as well.
Very quickly, I decided that we were going to do the vast majority of our work in-house. So I needed an LMS provider that would help us create that capability. Valamis delivered on that and more. And the result of that now, 2.5 years down the line, I have a completely internal committed design team. So it wasn't about handing over a product. It very much was, in my view, developing a relationship.
So you mentioned how the learning experience is really important to the men of Lambda Chi and your users, and creating, an experience that makes them want to come back and learn. So can you talk about what Valamis features, what has been most impactful for your learners, and how do you use them?
We now have 165 of these chapters, as I said, averaging about 40 men, but some up to 200. They are very, very competitive. So what we built with Valamis was a leaderboard where you will have one chapter can go in, they can see how much learning has been completed, how many credentials have been awarded, everything earns points, and they move up and down the leaderboard. And we just use that to drive competition and make it fun. And annually we award prizes for those chapters that have done well. In terms of channels, which is coming in very soon on the platform, the fact that you can have individuals in Arkansas who might be in charge of finance, the treasurer, that can talk to kid in Toronto, exchange ideas and get advice is crucial. Young people like to talk to other young people. They want to hear, what are you doing? How can we work this out together and share tips? So the channel concept is fantastic. The analytics that you provide taught us early on that when we were seeing real activity on the platform, and believe it or not, it was very late on a Sunday night or in the very early hours of a Monday morning. That's not ideal. So when we saw that concentrated users, and people said, well, that's in terms of their lifestyle, they've been told by their C-suite boss, come on, get in, get the programs, get this done, therefore they're going to go and do it Sunday night. That's not ideal. So we were able to go back and then build a structure for these chapters, business units, to say this is when you really need to learn. Had we not had those analytics, we would be purely looking at adoption and completion. And the last bit is really important to us, is that seamless social learning experience. We have built in multiple exercise and multiple social touch points where the LMS really is hybrid. So that is online, and live in the room. So the young man does his learning online, but he also joins lots of live sessions led by an instructor. But equally, there are lots of activities they can download and do themselves. So we really have built this hybrid environment through your platform.
So since you're creating this hybrid environment, connecting everything into the learning platform to create the best experience for your learners, are you using any integrations to set up between Valamis and your other systems in your tech stack? And do they enhance the learning experience in any way?
So right now we're integrating with Salesforce, and that's absolutely crucial. So if we think about our structure, and this is where Valamis helped us bring this really alive, that culture of learning. We have multiple touch points of people who oversee these chapters. Through Salesforce, we will then be able to get a very accurate picture, a snapshot on not just the learning, but also lots of other metrics that we use to measure that chapter. And on top of that, we integrate with lots of other learning tools in terms of video design, the development of normal learning assets, and of course, creating social video experiences.
That's great. Having that growth with you and with your organization as you figure out more about your learners and how they want to learn. That's what it sounds like is going on with your experience.
It is. We've got very much a dual relationship, and Myles was crucial at the start of this. Myles was involved in helping find Valamis and another of other prospective partners. And Myles has a lot more experience than me in the LMS world. So I have no hesitation of working with Myles and bringing on board as a sort of like guide, say, this is what you need. This is what's on offer. Let's get these people in front of you. It's so easy to be blown away with technology and bells and whistles. And that's why you need to bring in, my view, someone like Myles that forces you to pause and think, right, what do you really need? Before you go and buy the kitchen sink and everything else and don't know how to use it.
Yeah, to not get swept up by, all the cool features and things that look really good, but when it comes down to it, do you need it? Is it going to solve your main pain points and the problems that you're having? I think that's important. And Myles, since you have so much experience looking at different learning systems, based on your knowledge of this industry, what are some of the key factors that organizations should consider when implementing a new learning system?
We spent quite a lot of time with Simon and his peers in the leadership team and representatives of, the sort of the learners as well, to understand what does this mean in their lives and in the organization, what role will it play, so that you're really clear that you're going to market for something that's going to add to the organization and to the business. That might be a system, but not just to think about systems implementation, to think about business change, which is essentially what you're doing. And I think then from that gives you a sense of, what are the most important roles that this system needs to play. And as you were saying earlier, what's the information and the data, the signals of success that you can expect to see, so that you've got a sense of, where to see that value being added, and also where, how to respond where it's not being added. So I think those are some of the really important things, to think about in advance before you do go to market, and also before you kick off an implementation as well. And then I think it builds on partnership, clarity of roles and responsibilities, communication, etc. It's really to start with those broader goals that describe the value of the system, rather than just diving into what the technology needs to do, feature sets, project plans, etc. I think that's the most important thing.
Okay, so Myles, from your research, can you share some best practices for sustaining engagement in learning programs and keeping people engaged in the learning system and wanting to come back to learn more?
I think the most important thing is to understand what engagement looks like in your context. That might be more or less behavior. It might be consumption of content, or, as Simon was describing, it's probably more about activity with other people as well, and sort of participation over time. And some activities, not as healthy as others. As Simon said, 2 a.m. on a Monday is perhaps not the kind of engagement you want to encourage. So I think you need to be clear about what does good engagement look like for us, given the goals we're trying to achieve. And I think in Simon's case, for Lambda Chi, that's very much more about participation than just consumption. It was about sort of sharing and conversation rather than just sort of completion activity. So it's being a bit more subtle with those data signals. I think the most important thing though is that engagement isn't kind of something you should do. You need to make this part of the responsibility of the team that are running the program, and it needs to be part of the way you work as you design it, but also as you roll it out. You don't work on engagement at the end of a particular milestone or whatever. You work on engagement all the way through, and you build engagement over time. As it's part of how you work. And I think as well, I think one of the really useful things, and the leaderboards are probably one good way of doing this, but you also reflect back to learners, what does their engagement look like and why is that good? So again, that might help you to reinforce what healthy engagement looks like, or what more positive engagement looks like, but make sure that it's clear, to your community of learners or to the individuals, what does engagement look like, and show them that.
And with the leaderboard, you can get points for whatever you want in there. We really want these young men to have that social learning experience. So if you join a live session on the platform, you're going to get more points going to the leaderboard. The leaderboard is, in my view, is a great invention because it just captures that sense of competition. People like to win. People like to be seen that they're doing well. And the more that we engineer that social learning experience, the better.
And Myles, from your experience, what are some ways that organizations can effectively scale their learning programs?
I think the industry's learning quite a lot here as it goes along. It probably with care is the simple answer. I think one of the really important things about scaling is understanding your own capacity and capability. So how easily can we manage scale in our organization? And that might be not just because you've got lots of people, but it might be you have enough free time. You've got the structures in place to communicate progress, etc. So there's a lot about learning how ready you are to scale as a learning team, as much as there is about sort of designing and scaling the program. I think that's a really important point that's easy to overlook. So you need to work out, are we ready? What's the right moment for us to scale as well? So I think that kind of self-knowledge and self-awareness is really significant. Then I think it's about clearer project management type activity of, to pilot, test, and maybe test early with your closer allies. So I remember from my time at the BBC, where we would roll out programs and we'd try and pilot and scale. We'd never go to news first because news were big and difficult and they had their own resources. So you go to your closer allies who are ready to work with you, where you have those stronger relationships and you can learn together. I think that's a really important step in scaling as well. And I think there's some more sort of straightforward things about the platform robustness, availability of content, refresh cycles for content, etc. Those are probably more sort of clearer, but I think there's something about understanding how ready you are to scale is where a lot of scaling up can falter, because you can see the path ahead, but you don't know really how ready you are to follow that path and how quickly. And inevitably there will be some stumbling along that path, but that's what you need to do early before it becomes critical as well, I think.
So Simon, integration of the learning system is just one piece of the puzzle. So once you had the system in place, I think the next challenge is ensuring learning engagement and getting people to the platform to learn. So how did you encourage voluntary learning with your learners to participate on such a large scale and then continuously year after year?
Okay, there's a couple elements to this. So thankfully, regarding gamification, Valamis was fully on board with developing out that leaderboard concept, and really we were taking advantage of that sense of competition within the different chapters. But at the end of the day, an LMS on its own will not embed learning. You're not going to change culture just through an LMS. You've got to build that coalition of people that surround the chapter, the business unit, whatever you do. So, in my previous experience, you would have managers that would be identified to be early adopters and supporters of the system. But really, even then, that was quite a light touch. What we worked on with Valamis was very much really making sure that we can support the qualified trainers, the experienced adults that surround the chapters, and giving them a role. That is absolutely crucial. So we got to make sure that the LMS appeals to a 20-year-old who's at college and learning about finance, but also somebody who's 55, 60, that can go into that LMS, download the activities, download the exercises, and work in the chapter with them. So it's a big audience, but you've got to build that sense of ownership that everybody has to be behind the learning management system and what you want to achieve.
And that's so important what you said about building a coalition within your business, your organization, really getting people to support the learning programs and the learning systems.
Can I add something? Sorry, Simon, to interrupt, but I was just reflecting on what you said about, in a corporate environment, you rely on line managers, to sort of play some of this role. I think it's really easy to overestimate how ready line managers are to do that anyway. Because line managers are very, very busy. They've got a lot to do. They've got a whole team to support. They don't necessarily know what the program is. They're not fully steeped in the design of it. They don't care about it as much as you do. It's not that they don't think it's important. So I think it's really easy to overlook that engagement with line managers. There's a lot of assumptions that we see in our corporate network about line manager availability and attention. So don't undercook it, I guess, is my guidance.
And that then links into our volunteers, because we are blessed. We have a large body of people that want the chapters to succeed, and they're willing to give their time back. So really, when it came to getting them on board, it was fully articulating the problem that we're facing with young men going into college, but also the gap between college and career. It's about bringing that alive. It's about making the volunteers realize that you're a partner in meeting this challenge, and the LMS is a part of the puzzle. But you need to be willing to be a supporter of that system, go in, engage with the learning assets, and work with the young person. And I'll give you an example. I had an adult instructor that joined a live session with the chapter C-suite, and they went through decision making, SWOT analysis, etc. So this is a businessman in his 40s. Messaged me, love this, really enjoyed this, goes back into the platform, downloads the exercises, runs those themselves at a local level. So you've got to see Valamis as part of a much bigger system, but Valamis very much is key to it, okay? Everything has to flow through that system so we're all singing off the same hymn sheet.
And you mentioned that building an internal learning culture is really important to get that buy-in, to get that support for engaging the learners. So how did you specifically build that internal learning culture that supports the learners and the users?
I would have to say it's an ongoing battle. We are such a vast organization. It's about building, again, that sense of ownership. It's about identifying key people. So again, in the business sense, that's no different. You identify people who are fully on board, you identify the early adopters, and then you identify people who they can then influence regarding the learning platform. And of course, then you have lots of mechanisms, town halls, train the trainer, etc. But it's about building awareness and making sure we bring everybody in together.
And I'm sure you faced a lot of challenges along the way. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you've had in keeping learners engaged long term and keep them coming back for more learning? For some,
it's the so what. I've completed this, what next? And we're a bit like, we don't have anything else right now. But learning is all about reinforcement and repetition. So you've got to make sure that the adult advisors are equipped to go back and say, well, you might have done that, but we got to keep reinforcing it to make sure it's applied. Building interest and that sense of importance, because they often don't realize the importance of what we are trying to deliver, to equip them with. And remember, they didn't join for learning, and that is a real challenge. When they get into school, graduation seems years and years away. And they don't realize it's going to be there like that, and that piece of paper in your hand isn't enough. So you need to have something where you can talk to leading a team, looking after a project, a pipeline, a budget, working with stakeholders. And that's where Valamis comes in. That's where Credly, that's where our skills come in. That's why we have built measurement that's AI and human-based. And I know that I'm really proud about what we have pulled off together in our partnership. And I went to a business school now a couple of months ago, and I showed our portfolio of credentials. They were absolutely blown away that students on their campus are being offered this. They couldn't believe it, because there's a massive gap in the market, and particularly for young men and women who are not in business majors, and they're not ready for the real world. They're also not ready to lead teams, critically think, debate, analyze. All those skills we try to develop through Lambda Chi Academy, through the exercises and the activities. But it's not a silver bullet, and that's why the learning culture and all those advisors come in. They're absolutely crucial. We are popping in a regular basis. You're picking up the exercises, you're picking up the budget, and you're saying, let's go back over this. What can we learn? What can we develop?
And that's so important what you're doing. You're identifying those skills, really the skills gap between university and the business world and what people need on the job, and creating that learning program to close that skills gap. And I think that's such an important topic right now. A lot of people are focused on upskilling and reskilling, and you're really setting up your learners for success in the future by closing those skill gaps. So that's great to hear.
It's a bit like in the world of finance, and then you become a finance business partner, and then you have to have that ability to articulate your role to another audience. The fraternity world is full of little Greek sort of nuances, but at the end of the day, it is a small business, and you have to meet a number of bottom lines. You have to recruit, you have to pay your bills, you have to conduct a series of philanthropic projects, GPA, the list goes on and on. The result of what I've just talked about is you have to have learning to meet that gap. And you have to have learning that engages, makes them sit up very fast, because they'll lose attention like that. And I can tell you now, we are now having, a couple of years in, we are having people coming back to us saying, thank you for the platform and the program. I was able to talk about my experience now in a job interview. To me, big tick.
Yeah, that just shows how impactful the learning is that you've created and the learning environment. It's not just about going to the platform, completing a lesson. It's the long-term impact, the information that's staying with them, and creating that memorable learning experience that they'll carry on. That's what it's all about. That's what creating a learning culture really is.
And we have to rapidly be able to create content, and that is key, because Myles talked about how novice our training team, our designers were a couple of years ago. So we had to upskill pretty fast, and now we have to be able to switch out content fast, new case studies being brought in, etc. And thankfully, because of Valamis, we can do that. Some platforms are very complicated, but you've kept it nice and simple, and you've kept it fresh.
And finally, let's talk about growth. So you mentioned that Lambda Chi is across the United States, has many different chapters or business units. So with the learning program, you've expanded that nationally. And what were some of the key factors that made this possible to grow that way?
It always comes back to building that coalition, that advisor network. That's key, getting them on board. And really, I'd say a key factor is being patient at the start. The young men did not join for the learning team sitting in Indianapolis. So it's been persistent marketing. It's been persistent visits to chapters. It's been engaging with key stakeholders on campus. And it's reinforcing that message that there is a significant skills gap, and we are here to help you fill that gap. But like everything, often when you buy something, it's expensive and you invest the man hours, you expect a quick return. You don't get a quick return in this world. But we are seeing this now. And I'll give you an example. Last November, so we run live training sessions. We only have about 30 attend. I was pretty disappointed. A few months ago, we had 240. This is big because these are 240 young men who either should be studying, they're either engaging in social activities on campus, they're enjoying a young person's life at college. Now we're having 240 are giving up their time in an evening to learn about leadership behavior, SWOT analysis, budget, etc., etc., etc. That tells me something. The entire program can take 6 to 8 hours to do, where we are now seeing a significant increase. I believe we're going to close out this year with about 700 credentials. It's taken time to get there, and with our regionalization plans, where we intend to build more and more learning networks that we're going to go in and influence the chapters, it's only going to increase.
That's great. And I think measuring that learning is an important piece of it, and to know that it's working. So how do you measure success, especially when the learning impact takes some time to show?
Well, naturally, you're looking at adoption year on year, right? And it's not just engagement in the learning. Are we actually seeing people pass the learning? So we are seeing a significant increase. We are also getting reports back from young men going into business saying, this helped me. But equally, what else are we seeing a difference of? We are seeing our organization grow. Now this is where it gets really hard, right? It gets really hard to say, did Simon and Valamis, his team, Lambda Chi, did they cause this? This is where it gets really difficult. So I move from very much the concrete numbers of adoption and pass marks. I then get that sort of tangential feedback, and now it gets really murky. But we are one of very few fraternities that are now growing, okay? And we are growing in a declining marketplace because less men are going to college. But we are actually growing, and we're growing fast. So there's something happening at a chapter level. Our chapters are also becoming more fiscally responsible. So there is a dynamic, and we can't put our finger on it, but we are succeeding as an organization. I would have to say other organizations are not, and they do not have this suite of learning that we have. So there's something right there. It's very hard to say what it is, but the numbers don't lie in terms of our growth, and we are growing in a declining market.
And the growth you've experienced with your learning program is really encouraging and inspiring to a lot of organizations, looking for ways to do that. And you mentioned that you have alumni with Lambda Chi that are also involved in your learning programs. So how has involving alumni as subject matter experts enhanced the learning program?
Absolutely crucial. Now, this is one thing that we learned very fast. Lambda Chi's only want to hear from Lambda Chi's. And I suppose that makes sense, but that puts pressure on a design team rather than pulling a generic exercise case study, something from the ether. So using the alumni has been crucial. The benefit, of course, they then become key supporters. So in terms of the recruiting and sales program, we heavily naturally lead on alumni who work in the world of sales. People who are in for the philanthropic program, those are engaged in corporate social responsibility. So getting these people involved, there's no other way to do it. However, it takes longer, because often you could just go lift a product and just embed it in Valamis and say, for example, that is our sales program. We covered it all in Lambda Chi sort of branding. But we know from the start this does not work. They actually want to hear stories and experiences from Lambda Chi's, because naturally they will then go and connect with them.
And I think that speaks a lot to using those subject matter experts within your organization, and who can you utilize to help with that knowledge sharing and develop learning and more of the learning program for your everyday users. I think that's a crucial piece of really building up that learning culture that you spoke about.
Yeah, and you got to be patient. So I would just give advice to anybody out there on this journey. Don't get excited with any platform. Don't go out and rapidly spend money. Think about really what your audience needs, what they want to hear. And if that means you're not releasing something in the next half year, but it's the second half year or maybe the year after, so be it. Trust me, you will save in the long run. Get these key people on board, build your internal capability, build your coalition of supporters.
What role does celebrating learning achievements, whether they're big or small, play in sustaining the learning momentum?
First one, massively increases the morale of the team in the center, who are really always in the trenches trying to get the stuff out the door and refine it. But that is all key down to marketing and to reinforcing to people that we are on the right track. Our CEO he is very clear that the growth that we are seeing in colleges, despite everything, he ties it directly to the learning and Lambda Chi Academy and the advisors that support it. He's under no illusion, and that's constantly reinforced and make people realize we're on the right track because we are offering something that's not being offered elsewhere, and a lot of colleges most definitely are not offering.
Simon, this has been a great conversation. I think there's a lot to unpack here about building the learning culture, a lot of information about how to grow that learning program that a lot of the organizations can learn from. So to wrap up, do you have advice that you would give to other organizations that are in the process of selecting an LMS platform?
Don't be afraid to bring in a consultant like Myles to help you on that journey. That spend will save you a significant amount of money down the line. Really ask yourselves questions. It's one thing to have the budget for the LMS. Do you have the budget for the design team to meet the needs of the LMS? Do you have the budget also to create that network of supporters, that coalition I keep talking about? If you don't have that, and if you do not really place learning at the very center of your culture, you've got to really set expectations regarding what you can achieve. There's one other thing that is crucial. Really, when you're going to select the LMS and you're meeting all the teams and you're being exposed to these presentations, really ask yourself, could you have a relationship with this team in the long term? Will they be there when it gets gritty, gnarly? How quickly will they respond? What's their depth of knowledge as well? How often have they failed at this? What do they really know? And I'm going to give a big shout out to your senior learning partner, Dawn Vieira. I immediately, and the team immediately gelled with Dawn because Dawn made it very clear that she was fully invested in our success, but she came with a heck of a lot of experience. So we were not being sold to by somebody who was simply there to sell an LMS. Dawn knows learning. She knows platforms. She knows what we need to do. So that partnership is crucial. If we didn't have that, if we didn't have the Valamis willingness to adapt, share a pipeline and share ideas, this relationship would have withered on the vine. We would have definitely drifted away and we wouldn't have had an impact at a local level. Honestly, relationships, everything, and that capability, we landed with Dawn. So shout out to Dawn. The reason why you've got to get the right LMS and all that culture that we've talked about, from my perspective, is the student that we deal with, our ultimate customer. They didn't join us to learn. We have very little stick. We cannot really pay them to do this. We can't force them to do it. We are massively engaged in a game of influence. So if the platform is substandard, if it's clunky, if it's difficult to navigate, if it doesn't work, they will drop off in a second and we won't get them back. So we are up against a really, really tough customer that is a 100% volunteer. And we have to engage them at the get-go. So it's a big ask. And thankfully, you've been a key part of meeting that ask.